For my dissertation, I will be looking at the question, has personalised music listening made us a less sociable generation? For which I will be looking at authors such as O'Hara, Brown, Katz and Denora. I believe this research project to be viable, as there is plenty of research to suggest that music made previous generations sociable, as shown in the quote by Katz. Before the advent of recording, listening to music has always been a communal activity. There is also research to suggest that music has made our generation sociable. In the last 50 years, music has been publicly connected with a series of youth subcultures. There is, however, plenty of research to suggest that due to the invention of personalised music listening devices, such as iPods, our generation has become less sociable than previous generations, as shown here in the quotes by O'Hara and Brown and Denora. Once completed, this research may present reasons as to why young people become isolated and withdrawn, and possibly provide a solution to this. It could also show gaps in the market that companies such as Apple may wish to break into by creating more or less sociable music listening devices. The objective of my research project is to see whether or not personalised music listening devices such as iPods, laptops, mobiles have made us a less sociable generation, or are we just as sociable as previous generations? I will be basing my project on the hypothesis personalised music listening devices have made our generation, known as Generation Y, less sociable. In order to properly study this project, I will use both quantitative and qualitative data. I believe this to be appropriate, as quantitative data will give me easy to analyse results from which I can draw an accurate conclusion, and as states in Seal's quote, a study looking at social factors such as generations favours quantitative research. I will also use qualitative data, as I will be able to get a few more in-depth accounts of people's opinions and uses of personalised music listening devices. For these, I will need to obtain permission from the participants to use their answers and accounts for my study. When looking at ethics of a social research project such as this, Denscombe says you shall follow 3 rules. Respect the rights and dignity of those who are participating in the research project. Avoid any harm to the participants arising from their involvement in the research, and operate honestly and with integrity. Some participants, while willing to take part, may not wish for others to know that they have. Therefore, maintaining anonymity is an important ethical issue. I would also need to make sure my study isn't too invasive of the participants' privacy, and give them the right to withdraw from the study should they decide they no longer want to participate. There are, however, limitations with my study. Although I aim to have a wide sample as shown in a few slides, I may have trouble actually getting hold of enough people to study. As a student, it will be easy for me to get hold of the youngest age range that I aim to study, but for a fair representation, I would need equal amounts across the ranges. There may also be some interviewer bias, with me unintentionally inflicting my views on the participants, and being more inclined to ask certain people who will answer in a way that supports my hypothesis. For this study, I will gather my data using questionnaires and interviews. I feel these are appropriate, as they will allow me to collect the qualitative and quantitative data that I require to validate my study. The advantages of a questionnaire are that they are quick, easy to analyse, and gain a lot of information quickly. Disadvantages would be that you are unable to get a fairly represented sample, participants may be dishonest or misinterpret the questions. The advantages of interviews are that you can get more in-depth information and that you can stray from the structured approach to gain more elaborate answers. Disadvantages include it being harder to analyse, participants being dishonest, and interviewer bias with selecting participants. However, by using qualitative and quantitative data, the disadvantages of being difficult to analyse and not in-depth enough cancel out. While I cannot ensure people will be honest with their answers, which affects the validity of the study, I can carry out a pilot study to check the reliability of my questionnaire and interview. This research study looks across different generations. The 3 of which that I'm going to use I have shown here, along with the age span of each generation, and the main music listening technology available at that time. I will use these 3 generations in my interviews and my questionnaires making sure I have a fair representation of each one. To get my sample, I will use random sampling method. It will be easier to get hold of people to ask, and I will end up with a large amount of data to analyse, making the study reliable. Here is an example of the questionnaire questions I may choose to use for my study. And here is an example of some interview questions. For this, I will change the wording for the older generations to make it a reflective interview, back to when they were the youngest age range. This could affect the reliability of the interviews as they rely on the participants' memory. The limitations of my work include only a small area of population is being covered, there may be interviewer bias towards participants, and participants may be dishonest with their answers in the interviews and questionnaires. To solve one problem, I could ask other people to help administer the questionnaires, which would lessen the personal bias. I would also make the questions the least invasive that I could, and word them to be public-friendly so participants don't feel intimidated. These issues may affect the research, as it only represents a small sample of people and not a whole population, which could affect the accuracy of the study. Also, if I hand the questionnaires out, I may only receive a few back, which wouldn't give me much data to work with, and it may only be a certain age group that return the questionnaires, which would be giving an unfair representation and again negatively affect the results. Ultimately, I would expect to find that my findings support the hypothesis that I made, possibly with the odd anomaly. And here is my bibliography.